Welcome to our podcast series, 5 Questions, 5 Answers, in which we explore recent U.S. trade policies and U.S. trade rules that can affect thousands of companies. We have a goal in mind to help you, the listener, translate the legal into real-world business strategies. My name is Birgit Matthiesen. I'm the Director of North American Manufacturing here at Aaron Fox Schiff in Washington, D.C. I get the easy part. I get to ask the questions, and I get to choose the colleague or the guest I know will have the right answers for you. So in the next few minutes, I will ask 5 questions that reflect the concerns we've been hearing from business leaders, all who want to understand the rules, but they also need to mitigate their business risk while increasing their bottom line. So let's start.
It was dubbed the Nixon Shock. That would be President Nixon and shock. But let's go back a few years before that. It did all start with his predecessor, John Kennedy. In Mr. Kennedy's term of office, and while he was there, he signed into law something eventually called the 1962 Trade Expansion Act. That aim was to stimulate U.S. domestic economic growth, notably by reducing U.S. tariffs on imports. It also aimed to strengthen national security and protect U.S. domestic industry in various ways, and one of those brought us the beginnings of the now famous Section 232 investigations. And back to President Nixon. Fast forward, and he begins his second term in office with a quite historic landslide victory. Once in office, he announces his new economic policy, quote unquote, to create a new prosperity without war, he said. It is that policy, dramatically altering how U.S. approached critical areas of monetary and domestic policy, that would soon be known as the Nixon Shock. President Nixon proposes what eventually became the Trade Act of 1974, and that was eventually signed by his successor, Gerald Ford. That law builds on previous trade legislation, and it gave the executive branch much wider authority to conduct trade policy, which all brings us to today and the subject of today's podcast. It is the use and the changes over time of Section 232 of these important pieces of legislation and their investigations in imports to the United States in the aim to combat unfair trade competition, and which has gained such traction with more modern administrations, most certainly during this current one. So to help us understand how these investigations work, I've asked my colleague, Jessica DiPietro, to join us today. Jessica comes to Aaron Fox Schiff from the U.S. Department of Commerce, where she was an attorney in the Office of General Counsel for Trade Enforcement and Compliance. So who best to be my guest during these uncertain times? Jessica, welcome as a new guest to our podcast.
Hi, Birgit. Thank you for having me.
Jessica, did I explain the origins of Section 232 accurately enough? Did I get it right?
You did. So, as you said, President Nixon was the first president to really take the expansion part of the Trade Expansion Act quite literally, where President Nixon used and set a precedent for using Section 232 to leverage it for a broader economic goal. And although his actions were looking towards balancing, or so he says, looking towards balancing currency and balance of payments, these are not directly related to national security. And that's close to the attitude we are seeing today, where this current White House has their outward vision is that economic security is national security, is Section 232.
So I've listened to you speak to clients often enough on Section 232 investigations, and I know that the process is long, it's arduous, it's complicated. So, for those corporate executives who are now faced with these new U.S. tariff actions and who may be listening today, how do these investigations really work? How and when are they launched? And how do they often conclude?
Yes, this is something that I hate saying, but we have to pay attention to what's going on in Washington for these Section 232 investigations, which means which is difficult because a lot of times these Section 232 investigations are meant to help those companies that are not operating in Washington. These Section 232 investigations can be requested by the president, they can be requested by Congress, they can be requested by a secretary of an agency, but they can also be requested by what is an undefined interested party. That interested party is usually a member of the US domestic industry, which which should benefit from these Section 232 tariffs. Um, that domestic industry could be a manufacturer, it could be an industry association, it can be someone who can make the colorable argument that they believe their economic welfare and ability to meet national defense needs are threatened by foreign competition or excessive imports by a specific item. That's that's just step 1. And then step 2 is we will see an announcement out of a Federal Register notice. That Federal Register notice is what we like to call notice. That notice opens up a period for comment, and it is during this time that any party can comment on the potential for Section 232 national security tariffs. We've seen foreign governments comment, we have seen foreign industry associations comment, and we also see the US industry from importers to the folks that are actually manufacturing these goods comment. There are usually a couple rounds of comment, whether it's during this initial period or later in the action. Later in the action is when we will often see a lot of comments on what products should be included and what products should be excluded from any tariffs. After that, there is a public hearing. Then the Secretary of Commerce gathers all of its information and findings and issues that report to the president. The president makes the final decision as to whether there is a threat to US national security or whether there is not. And he decides whether to take action. And the president informs Congress of his decision of what that action should be. Um, as we know, there are some of these Section 232s that are early in the process. And then there are others that have been in place since President Trump's first presidency and stayed in place through President Biden, where we saw many rounds of different exclusions and different reviews by Congress.
So, the Federal Register notice that launches the investigation or announces the investigation, I should say, they always use this term, and it's the term quote unquote scope, the scope of the investigation. And from my understanding, scope refers to the range of products that are going to be subject to the investigation, and therefore the range of products that, depending on how the investigation goes, would be subject to these massive tariffs. But I understand, hopefully that's correct, but also understand, Jessica, that the term scope can trap or snare or include products that could be considered component parts of a product that is primarily in the scope of the investigation.
Yes. Unfortunately, the scope is broad. It is broad, it is confusing often, and it is often where the rubber meets the road. And this is why we often see so many clients, so many companies filing these comments on their specific products. For better or for worse, they just need to know if they're included and if they're going to have to pay these tariffs at the end of the day, because it's not always clear from the written language of that scope. And like you were saying, that scope could include the a part of a product. Like if you have a product that includes certain aluminum, only that aluminum would be tariffed at the border. Um, or it could be, and these are products that we're thinking about here are not just one simple sheet. We're also talking in goods ranging from like motorcycles and lawnmowers. Um, there the scope is broad, and that that is the short answer, that yes, it is very broad, and it, yes, could include many other different products that are either pieces or components of the full product or kit that you are bringing into the country, and that's very difficult to figure out as a company. If I were importing a lawnmower, I don't think I would be thinking about what the muffler was made out of and whether there would be a tariff on that piece of the lawnmower. And maybe I'm showing my white collarness right now that I don't know if a lawnmower has a muffler, but I'm pretty there. We get the point. I will not be doing my father proud with that comment. Um, and we it the scope's broad. It is not necessarily always something that is easily related to national security. I think steel and aluminum is a little easier to wrap your brain around as a product group. Not so easy when you start to think about how many products contain steel or aluminum. Um, Timber, lumber, a little easier to get your brain around. A wooden chair or furniture, not so easy to get your brain around. But these are all products for which there are Section 232 actions in process or in force right now.
And I would imagine that companies need to know, and uh, because these tariffs are high enough that they can often be called, bet the company tariffs. I mean, especially for assemblies in the U.S. or production in the U.S. using a multitude of inputs, steel and aluminum, as you mentioned, being some of the more obvious ones. You're right. So, which brings me to my next question. What should executives be doing? What should they be doing now? Either those now identified in investigations already on the book, or those maybe not considering that they are part of an investigation scope, but might be.
Certainly. I think as your first line is you want to have someone, whether it is you as a one-man shop or whether it's someone on your compliance team, you want someone that is making sure you are getting the Federal Register alerts, making sure that you are following the news so that you know to reach out or so you know to handle something to be able to figure this out. It is as I was saying, I think one of my first comments is that I'm so sorry to say we need to pay attention to what Washington is doing, but you do need to, these are changing. We do need to be paying attention to what is happening here on these tariffs. And that's your first line. So your second line is making sure that the classification of your products is correct and that you know how your products are classified. It's an easier cross check to be able to search for an HTS. And then, unfortunately, that is not the end of the analysis, but it is a really good start to know whether you are gobbled up into one of these tariff actions. Once you know whether you are in this tariff action or think you might be, figure out that classification, also figure out the valuation of that product. So like we were just talking about, if it's a piece of something or if it's a piece of something, is the whole thing going to be tariffed at the border or is it just that piece? We believe it's just that piece, but again, we are following, as much as we are telling everyone else to follow what is going on with the administration, we are following minute by minute because sometimes that's how quickly these decisions change. Um, and then I think the last thing that is a large point to follow and to make sure that as an importer, you can understand how you can trace that product back to its country of origin. Um, know where it's from, know how it's made, and know how it gets to the United States.
I happen to know that you're very, very busy as we wrap up 2025, Jessica. So I'm particularly grateful for the time you spent with us. So I'm going to end with this last question, but it's a doozy. And I'm going to ask you to look into the crystal ball. The number of 232 investigations are certainly ticking up. So for 2026, what are you bracing for, and what can we expect on these trade remedy actions?
I know, ticking up quickly. 13, 14, I think we're at now, when there were
Wow.
2 total prior to, we talked about Nixon, like, really ramping up
Really?
using 232, and now, President Trump has, uh he likes to win, and he is winning here, in numbers. I I think we're going to see the number continue to increase. Um, I think that this White House, first in the first administration, and then now President Trump's second administration, second term, and I don't want to leave President Biden out of this. He kept all of President Trump's initial Section 232 actions in place. Like we we were, when we got in it, we got in it. But I do think that this administration is seeing that Section 232 is a tool that works. Works is
Yeah.
an interesting phrase because what works for what, like, what is it working for? Is it building the coffers? Is it helping the US industry? Maybe it's doing a little bit of both. Maybe it's not doing either, but it is a tool that the administration has found it can continue to use, where other tariffs are still under scrutiny and are being litigated. Section 232 kind of went through that litigation process during the first administration, and I'm sure we will see more litigation because as we said multiple times, this is messy. Which products are covered is messy. But I think we should because all of that litigation is happening, I think we should be prepared to see more of these potential Section 232 actions, um, for because they're getting tariffs on products, but also because we're seeing the president use these tariffs as negotiating chips with countries that have historically been our partner countries. So while we may be leaving tariffs on China. We're negotiating with the UK, or we're negotiating with Korea. We're even negotiating with China. So I think the president has historically used tariffs as a negotiating piece, and I think he's going to continue to do that in 2026.
For our listeners, we will make sure to put Jessica's contact information and her bio, and also a link to our now most widely read tariff tracker that Jessica contributes to. I would urge listeners to go to those websites and those links and to subscribe, because as Jessica has urged a couple of times in this conversation, you companies do not want to be flat-footed. And if they are losing sleep over whether or not they are part of these investigations or what the right tariff classification and valuations are, it's the right information at the right time that is so critical in the mitigation of these tariffs and this intense scrutiny in the supply chain. Jessica, as I said, I know that you're a very busy woman, and I will let you off the hook, except to say thank you so much. And I will also mention that the team at Aaron Fox Schiff will be publishing our 2026 look ahead. Jessica will be contributing to that because 2026 is going to be yet another roller coaster, and we are going to stay on top of this for you and our listeners. Smart in your world, or the Aaron Fox Schiff team. It is not simply a tagline. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Jessica.
Thanks, Bridget.